I think when people hear others say
Oh, I read over 100 books last year.
that, they think that could never be me. I'm such a slow reader. I haven't read a book in 5 years. I don't even know how to read. But I'm here to say that I never started off that way either. Everyone has to start somewhere. And quite frankly, I have been a pretty inconsistent reader my entire life. And it's only recently that I was able to kind of build this habit and build the hobby of reading so that I was able to achieve my goal last year to read over 100 books. Today, I kind of wanted to talk through my reading journey throughout my whole life, how I've fallen out and fallen back in with reading as a hobby, as well as discuss some tips at the end on how I think you guys could read more and perhaps develop a love for reading or start picking up reading as a fairly consistent hobby. So I want to start off in kindergarten, where I have a very distinct kind of core memory. We had reading time kind of specified out in our kindergarten program. And so I was so engrossed in the book that all the other students moved and like sat around in a circle with the teacher, and they were like about to start the lesson until my teacher like saw me and she was like,
Hey, Ashley, like, are you gonna come join us?
and I like came out of this fog and looked around and like realized everyone was staring at me. Everyone was like at the circle, and I had like completely not registered. Everyone's like scraping chairs, everyone putting their books away, the teacher being like, reading time is over, everyone was like, let's get into our little circle time. And it was super embarrassing. And I had to be like, oh yeah, and I like closed my book up and I like ran and put it away, and then ran to during circle time, and everyone was kind of like chuckling that I had, you know, this big fumble. It's very early on in my life is when I realized that reading was very much like a form of escapism for me, and that when I started reading, I like transported my brain to a whole different realm, and everything around me just disappeared. When we were in elementary school and we got separated into like our different reading groups, I was always put into the advanced reader group. Not to brag or anything. That's kind of around the time where I realized, hey, I could be reading outside of school for fun. But at the time, I was also really afraid of kind of larger books. They were really intimidating to me. So, like, examples, Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, which every kid was like loving at the time, I was so afraid of, and I didn't even want to get close to them because not only were they really long, but you had to read them in the chronological order to really understand the story. So the fact that Harry Potter and Percy Jackson were like book 1, book 2, book 3, like a chronological series, intimidated me even more because it meant that it was even longer and there was more commitment for it. Even back then, had commitment issues. Really stopped and like wasn't doing any reading going into middle school, because I think that's also around the time where you start to prioritize like your friendships, and also you start thinking about like relationships, which is honestly too young to be thinking about that stuff. And now I look back and I'm like, girl, what were you doing? What really brought me back into reading was the Hunger Games series. And if you were around during this time, then you know it was a phenomenon. And me being middle school me, trying to like fit in, I didn't want to miss out. Basically, I have FOMO. So I was like, okay, let me read the entire Hunger Games trilogy. Thinking,
I just want to be in on it. I want to be able to talk to my friends about it and go see the movies.
I read that series in like 3 days. It was like a book a day. It was so good. I was engrossed, and that recatapulted my love for reading. Probably at the perfect time because I ended up moving in the middle of middle school. And if you've moved to any new school, you know it's honestly dreadful. You are the new kid amongst a bunch of other classmates who have known each other since they were like in kindergarten. I was not very extroverted. I'm still not very extroverted, so I was like that shy kind of nerdy kid. And that's when I picked up books again, kind of as comfort, because I was going back into these worlds that I was familiar with and characters that I was also really familiar with, and which kind of felt like old friends. That was really my escape from the isolation and the scary newness of going to a new school. And I dove like headfirst into reading and making that like my personality trait at the time. That's when I picked up Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, because I was like, well, I don't have any friends here, so let me just fill up my time reading. And really fell in love with both series. Now I see them as like some of the most defining series that I read in my childhood. And funnily enough, the first friend that I made at my new school was because I was reading The Mortal Instruments, I think, which also isn't great, but again, another defining series of my childhood. I was reading The Mortal Instruments, and we were in English class, and we got paired up for an assignment, and she saw what I was reading, and she started talking to me about it, saying, oh, I've read that, like, what do you think? You know, there's like another series. Started chatting about that, and we really clicked. And that was my first friend. Going into high school now, again, I kind of stopped reading. Reading is not considered cool in high school, apparently. Does not give you any kind of extra social points to move up in the hierarchy that if you've been to American high school or if you've even seen like American high school dramas, you know exists, and you need to be able to find your kind of cluster, your group, in order to survive. Otherwise, it's brutal. So I stopped reading as much and started, falling into hobbies that my other friends were also really interested in. Also in high school is when I started to really focus on my studies, being like, I need to study, I need to ace this test, or I need to ace this assignment in order to get a good grade, and my transcript has to look great, because with a great transcript, I'll be able to get into a good university. So that's all the stuff that was going on in my head at the time. Reading definitely was not at the top of my list. I honestly didn't have enough time for hobbies, I think. I was like going to school, doing extracurriculars, just trying everything I could to have my resume or my transcript look a certain way. Fast forward, I'm in college, I'm struggling. Like, it's a lot of work, and you have barely any time, again, because you're doing extracurriculars on top of like school, and those extracurriculars take up a lot of time. It wasn't until the pandemic came around, my sophomore year of college, that I had a wealth of free time. We weren't really able to do extracurriculars. Even classes weren't really as time consuming anymore. With that wealth of time, I was like, okay, let me pick up an old hobby. And I fell in love with the reading again. I started picking up more adult novels as
Wasn't really that teenager anymore.
in fact, I would be reading books about teenagers and being like, I am way past like 16 or 17. I feel like I'm ancient. And also it starts to kind of make you feel bad because you'll be like 20 years old and you're like, I've passed 16, but I have not saved the universe. I have not overthrown a corrupt government. So when you start reading adult, you're like, oh my God, adult problems. You're also, 20 plus years old and you have no idea what you're doing in your life. That is relatable. That is what I want to see. But it wasn't until 2022 came around that I made a vow to myself trying to make this a habit. And I set out for myself to read about 50 pages or about like an hour a day. I'm going to be honest with you guys right now, that did not happen. I did not stick with that every single day. 2022 is also the year that I graduated, which again frees up a lot more time for myself to read. And being the introvert that I am, it became a very important hobby for me because after work, after my social battery was drained and my brain was fried, I just wanted to stay in and relax. And a perfect hobby for that is to sit down and read a book and de-stress in that way. And I will say kind of now, to give you some advice growing up, is that once you get older, hanging out with your friends becomes harder. You all have less time for each other, and it's even harder to kind of make plans with everyone's conflicting schedules. So with that, you have to start getting comfortable being by yourself and taking care of yourself and finding hobbies that you can enjoy alone. Now for the tips that I have learned over the years that I want to share with you all to help you guys read more. Number one is to read books you like. And I cannot stress this enough. I feel like people hate reading, or they think it's boring, or they think it's difficult because of the stuff they make us read in high school. If you don't want to read books by old white men writing about death, then you don't need to read books by old white men writing about death. No one's just forcing you to do that for an assignment now, okay? So pick up books about things you'll like. If you like romance, you like watching, romantic dramas, rom-coms, pick up romance books. If you like watching Star Wars, if you like watching, sci-fi movies, pick up a sci-fi novel. Or if you like fantasy, you like The Witcher, you like Game of Thrones, pick up fantasy books. There are so many good books that can correspond to whatever type of movies or shows you like to watch. And you don't have to just be reading these old ancient classics that you read in high school that made you hate reading. Read stuff that you like, and you're more likely to fly through it, to have fun reading it, and then pick up another book. This is really important, but what you're trying to do is dispel this conception in your head that associates reading with boring kind of ancient texts and reconfigure it to associate reading with really fun, enjoyable stories that you personally connect with. And in that way, you'll find reading fun, you'll fall in love with reading, and then you'll want to read more. Instead of reading this book that you absolutely hated, that took you months to finish and literally drained you of brain cells. And that will only make you hate reading more and kind of compel you to not pick up another book because you're so tired and you're so done with reading. Young me would totally not agree with and would run for the hills from. But that is to read series. I know. Young me is quaking. The fact that I started reading Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, she would see as a betrayal. But I find that one of the most common areas that people kind of fall off reading is when they read a really great book and then afterwards they're like, I have no idea what to pick up next. It's that decision paralysis, I think, when there's way too many options, you have no way to narrow it down, and then you don't know what to pick up next. And then you just don't end up picking a book up for months. However, the great thing about series is that when you read the first book and you end up falling in love with the characters, in love with the world, and you find that story very engaging, you don't really need to think too much about what to pick up next. But if nothing else comes to mind, you can always rely on picking up the next book in the series. And then if that finishes and you still don't know what to read next, you could pick up the next one. The great thing about series is that there will always kind of be like a safety blanket option for you. So if you don't know what to choose next, there's going to be another novel for you to pick up right after. I'm not saying that you have to read kind of these 15 book long series. Definitely, if that doesn't interest you, don't do it. This goes back to tip 1, read things you like. But if there happens to be a series that's like 5 books long and you really love that character from the first book, you are invested in them and you want to see that full character arc, you're going to end up reading like the next 4 books in order to finish out that character arc and see where that character goes. The thing about series is that the plot points and the character arcs often span multiple books. So you're going to have to end up reading a couple books in order to see that arc or that plot point come to fruition. And the great thing about that, though, is that you're that much more motivated to continue reading, to see what happens next to your favorite characters or to the giant plot that's really taking up this whole series. And because of that, you end up reading more books than just, say, the one contained story if it was just a kind of solo novel. My third tip now is to read other formats of books. So think of it as physical, ebooks, and audiobooks. Those are the 3 formats that I primarily read. And this is also a really great tip if you're someone looking to read multiple books at a time. Now, I know that sounds crazy. I used to be one of the girlies that was like, I can only read 1 book at a time because I have very little, space in the brain and I can only keep one plot together. If I start reading other books, I get the plots muddled up and then I have no idea what's going on in each of the books. What I found really helps me to keep those plots distinct and kind of like in different categories in my brain is to read in different formats. So I'll have a book that I'm reading physically, a book that I'm reading on my iPad or another e-reader, and a book that I'm listening to on audiobook. I don't know what that does to my brain, the psychology behind it, but if I ever am reading multiple books at one time, I find that reading it through different formats really helps me to keep the plots distinct and not blend all together. Another tip to go with that, if you're looking to read multiple books at once, is to also make sure that the books in the different formats are also from different genres. Going back to reading in other formats, though, this is a great tip for people who are on the go, are really busy. I know it can be really hard to kind of bring a hardcover or paperback book with you everywhere. So having a ebook on your little Kindle or your iPad that you could just kind of take that one electronic with you and just have a whole library in there is really convenient if you're keen to multitasking and you have to do other chores or other duties. Then you can kind of just put the headphones in and listen to an audiobook, and it kind of reads like a podcast. It's just a really convenient way for you to get your reading in at any moment, even if you're doing other things. And because you're reading more often and kind of squeezing reading in during other activities, in the end, you end up reading more than you would have thought. Audiobooks, for example, were a real big discovery for me this year. I was kind of very adamant about not being an audiobook girly prior because I just don't think that I was able to concentrate. But if I'm doing a very simple task, I'm doing some chores or like organizing my planner, then I can kind of just like slip my headphones in and listen to my audiobook for an hour or so and squeeze my reading in through that way. My fourth tip for you now goes back to goal setting. It is to break your goals up into smaller, more digestible chunks. For example, if you have this big goal of reading 100 books by the end of the year, break that up into smaller chunks of, 8 or 9 books per month. And by achieving that kind of smaller goal every month, by the end of the year, you will have read 100 books without you ever even realizing it. Digging into that a little deeper, I definitely recommend building consistent habits to allow you to eventually reach those smaller goals. Like I said, I did in 2022, I had an aim to build the consistent habit of reading for at least an hour per day. And I can't lie to you guys, I wasn't always consistent with it. There would be days that I would miss, but just the act of building that habit and trying to keep it consistent still allowed me to read more than I've ever read in any other year, even with some days where I would be tired and I would miss checking that off. You could break it down even further and try to aim and read 30 pages a day. Or, if you don't want to do every day, you think that's going to be a little too difficult, maybe do, every other day. Whatever is most comfortable for you. Just make sure that your goals are reasonable and that your habits are something that you think is attainable to yourself. I would also highly recommend having some type of tracker to track every day that you do the habit. I feel like that has really helped me and kept me accountable. You can track it however you want, whatever method, platform works for you. But I think just the simple act of having that tracked in some place and being able to see your progress day by day really helps to kind of motivate you and provides kind of like a little reward. I always felt like me checking off the box every day was like a job well done. Last and final tip kind of goes against what I was saying about how reading can be one of those hobbies where you set your own pace and you have full control over. And it is to join a book club or start a buddy read. And this tip is really all about accountability. There have been times where I'll be in a reading slump for a week or a month. And even if I get no other reading done in that period of time, I always make sure to read the part or section that I have to read from my buddy read in order for me to be able to discuss it with my friend in our next meeting. And I've been very grateful to have 2 buddy reads with 2 close friends that have kept me accountable and kept me reading consistently or semi-consistently whenever I'm in one of those slumps, just because I know my friend is also doing the reading and I don't want to let them down by coming to our meeting and being like, hi, I didn't read the part and I have nothing to provide. Sorry for wasting your time. But again, like I said, this is one of those things where you kind of have to relinquish a little bit control and, talk with your book club or your buddy to set a pace that you both think works for you, as well as choose a book that you think you both will enjoy. And I think it's also important to be flexible with yourself. Again, this is for fun. This is a hobby. It's not an assignment, right? It's not something that you're supposed to labor over. So if you're not able to make it, you just haven't had time or you're in that slumpy feeling and you can't bring yourself to do it, just be honest with your friends and your club and you guys can reschedule. But I do think having those systems in place, to lean back on whenever you are in a slumpy mood is really important. Also really important just to have that outlet for you to share your thoughts and your opinions of a book on, because although reading is a hobby that you can do and enjoy alone, it actually is a lot more fun when you're able to chat with someone about your opinions and your thoughts on a book and connect with someone, maybe have that same perspective, or maybe they provide a different perspective and a different interpretation. And it allows you to really share something that you enjoy with someone else who is going to appreciate it and enjoy it as well. Now, I know that reading can be seen as a boring or intimidating hobby, but I hope that with my rehashing of my own journey with reading that you guys can see the fun escapism that it allows. If you are looking to get into reading or just wanting to read more, I hope that you found my 5 tips helpful and that you guys pick up a little bit more books this year than you did last year. So with that, thank you guys for tuning in, and please comment down below if you have any other tips on reading more that I may not have considered or may not have tried out yet. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!